As you can see here, we're starting out with Visual Studio Code and an empty folder opened up. The first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we have an up-to-date version of Node, which we can check with node-v. And we can see here that we have version 18.12.1, which is sufficient, but these things do change pretty quickly. So if you run into an error, check out the docs to make sure that that hasn't progressed. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to install Hardhat itself with yarn add dev Hardhat. There are also npm instructions on the doc site at hardhat.org, so be sure to check that out if you prefer npm. All right, the install process is completed. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run npx hardhat. And this will open up a little app that will create our project for us. We're going to pick TypeScript for some reasons we'll describe later. So I'll go ahead and select that now. This root is fine. We do want to git ignore, and we want all of these dependencies because we'll need them when we're writing tests later on. So we'll let this run. Okay, we can see that the project is finished building, and we've got a list of files and folders in the Explorer. Let's take a look at those first. Starting at the top, we have contracts, and there is a demo contract called lock.sol in here. We have our node modules folder, scripts, and this has a deployment script that we can use to deploy this contract to the blockchain. Test folder, which contains some tests that should look pretty familiar to you. That is, if you're a web developer. The Hardhat config file is where we can set up various things related to Hardhat. We're going to go ahead and change that to 8.17 for now to stay consistent with the rest of these exercises. We normally recommend that you stick to the most current version of Solidity, but that can introduce bugs that are not your fault and are difficult to figure out what's going on, so it's really up to you, particularly while you're learning. The README has a couple of useful commands, and then we have some other various config files. We can also run npx hardhat again within our project, and this will give us a list of all of the commands and options that are available. For now, let's try compiling our project. So we can do npx hardhat compile. Because remember, Solidity is a compiled language that lets us write human-readable code that gets turned into the bytecode that is read by the blockchain. Looking up top, we now have an artifacts folder, and if we dig into that a little bit, we can see the ABI for our smart contract. Returning to the contract itself, we can see that there's a pretty straightforward smart contract that allows a user to lock some funds and make them unavailable until after the time limit has elapsed. One thing I'll point out here that's nice is we do have the Hardhat console logging library added in, so we can uncomment that, uncomment this console log here, and this log will show up in the console for us when we test. I'll split the lock contract so that we can look at both the contract and the tests at the same time, which we can see in lock.ts. So again, these should look pretty familiar to most developers. We have Hardhat Chai matchers installed, and it lets us use and write Mocha and Chai tests the way that we're accustomed to. The great thing about using TypeScript is that Hardhat now has something called typechain built in, which makes IntelliSense work between our smart contracts and our tests. So if I go here, lock is the instance of the contract in this test, and I can do lock.unlockTime or lock.withdraw, and we can access our functions from the smart contract right here. To run the tests, we can use npx hardhat test. If you haven't compiled recently, this will recompile and then run your tests, and we can see all of our unit tests are working as expected, and while the tests were running, we got those console.logs to work as well.